Good evening, everyone. This is Monday, and that means it's time for Movies from A to Z. And today, the letter T stands for Targets. A 1968 film starring Boris Karloff, directed by Peter Bogdanovich, who also wrote the screenplay and co-wrote the story, along with his wife at the time, a woman named Polly Platt. Now, this film, fascinating little film, which has a backstory which is almost more interesting than the film itself. But let's first talk about what the film is about. Boris Karloff plays kind of somebody who's patterned after himself. He plays an actor named Byron Orlock, who is a horror movie actor. And he's been around for a long time, as Mr. Karloff had. He was in his late 70s at the time. And at the beginning of the film, he is sitting in a studio projection room looking at the latest horror film that he's just completed. And what we are looking at on the screen is the 1963 Roger Corman film called The Terror, in which Boris Karloff was the star along with Jack Nicholson. So we're watching scenes from that movie, which had already been out several years earlier, and a lot of people already knew about it and recognized it. So he's sitting there watching himself in this movie just a few years younger. And when the movie is finished, he announces that he's going to retire from making horror films because he feels that his brand of gothic horror that he's been doing since the 1930s is old-fashioned and people don't appreciate it as much as they used to, and that he's no longer, it's kind of an anachronism, and that the kind of horror that happens in everyday modern life is much more frightening and much more horrific than what he does on the screen in these old castles. So the people around him, the producers, his assistant, the director, played by Peter Bogdanovich, who was also acting in the film, of course they try to talk him out of it. Now, Peter Bogdanovich plays a character named Sammy Michaels, and he is very upset that Byron Orlock does not want to do any more of his films because he has written a script that he feels will be sort of a departure for Orlock, and he's trying to encourage him to change his mind about retiring and to do this script. Well, so that provides the drama for the film, at least part of it. Now, we also get into a completely different story about a young man played by an actor named Tim O'Kelly, a young man with a wife and who is living with his wife in a house with his parents, his mother and father. And he ends up being a killer. And I don't want to give you any more details than that because I don't want to spoil this for you. The film is filled with too many surprises and too many twists and turns, and it's very effective and very well done. And it's interesting that the two main characters, Byron Orlock, the actor, and this character played by Tim O'Kelly, what is his name in the film? I think it's Bobby something. Very all-American, handsome young guy. You know, looks like anybody you meet on the street and not be afraid of. That their stories intersect at the end of the film in a very interesting way. Now, here's how the movie got to be made. Roger Corman was trying to encourage Peter Bogdanovich to make his first feature film. Bogdanovich had worked with Corman as an assistant on one or two of his projects. I can't remember now what they were. But Corman said, I'd like to give you a chance to direct your first film. And he had these stipulations and ideas that he wanted Bogdanovich to use. Number one, he said that Boris Karloff owed him 2 days of work. Now, Karloff had not only made The Terror back in 1963, but about the same time he had made The Raven. And in fact, The Terror was made... the details are all confused depending on what you read and who was telling the story, but The Raven was being made, and there was a couple of days delay on that film, and so Corman decided to start making a whole new film on the same sets, and that was The Terror. Or the other story is that The Raven was finished, the sets were about to be torn down. Corman had Karloff and Jack Nicholson and Sandra Knight, who was Jack Nicholson's wife at the time, under contract for a couple of more days, and he asked them to stay and make this other film. Whatever is the truth among all those details is he claimed that Karloff owed him 2 more days of work. Apparently, Roger Corman paid his actors by the hour. I don't really know, but he said try to shoot 20 minutes with Karloff, and then use about 20 minutes of clips from The Terror, and then shoot another 40 minutes of another story that will intersect with those, and you'll have an 80-minute film. Well, so Bogdanovich and his wife came up with this idea for the story, and Bogdanovich actually took it to the director Samuel Fuller, who was also a writer of his own scripts. Apparently he and Bogdanovich were very good friends. And Samuel Fuller gave him some very good ideas for making the script even better. So according to Bogdanovich, the script that was finally made was because of Samuel Fuller, and he wanted to give him credit in the film, but Fuller said, no, I don't want it. So Bogdanovich named his character in the film Sammy Michaels after Samuel Michael Fuller. Anyway, so that's how the film got to be made, and it was made very quickly for a very low budget of about $130,000 by the end of 1967, I believe. And so they were searching around for someone to buy the film, and they finally found they finally sold it to Paramount. Well, by the time the film was getting around to be released, it was late in 1968, and this happened to be after the assassinations of both Robert Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King, a time when people were not necessarily excited about seeing films about assassinations and snipers and all this sort of thing. So the film was released, but it disappeared very quickly and didn't make a lot of money. It did manage to establish Peter Bogdanovich as a director, and that enabled him to go on, and in the next couple of years he wrote and directed The Last Picture Show, and his career just took off like crazy. Now the character played by Tim O'Kelly was based on the real life character. Let's see, what was the guy's name? Charles Whitman, he was the guy that did all the killing at the University of Texas in 1966. So that was based on reality. And of course, Byron Orlock was based on the reality of Boris Karloff's career. So it was a very interesting idea and executed extremely well. And I should say that Boris Karloff, the actor, was unlike Byron Orlock, the character, in that he never retired. He kept on making films almost up until the time that he died at the age of 81 in 1969. He made several films after he did Targets, and he was in bad health. He had a hard time walking, but he managed to get around with a cane. He gave a really good performance in this movie. And I would advise, especially people who are fans of Boris Karloff, both his old stuff back in the Golden Age and the things he was doing as a much older actor in the late 50s and up into the 60s, I would advise you to see this if you haven't, just to sort of add to your knowledge of what Boris Karloff was able to do, and also to fans of Peter Bogdanovich to see where he started out. Some of the other actors you might recognize in the film. A very popular comedian of the time named Sandy Barron has a small part in it, and an actor named let's see, what is his name? God, it's terrible. Robert Brown? Let's see. James Brown, sorry. Not James Brown the singer. James Brown, an actor who played a lot of sort of action parts, westerns, military things, all the way back in the 1940s. He was very well known in the 1950s for the TV series Rin Tin Tin, where he played Lieutenant Rip Masters. So people in my generation, he was a very familiar face and a very good actor. Now Tim O'Kelly, I looked him up on Wikipedia because his name is not all that familiar to me, but he had a lot of credits during the 1960s, a lot of TV shows. Not that many films, but a lot of things on television. And after the early 70s, he didn't have any more credits. And he died very young, at the age of 48. So I don't know what happened, but that's very sad to think of. But anyway, I don't know what else I want to say about Targets, except that it's very violent subject matter, which even for someone like me who is not crazy about violence, I think it's handled extremely well in a very intelligent and realistic way, not overly graphic in the sense that it didn't celebrate amounts of blood flowing everywhere just to exploit it and get people all excited with blood. It just showed what really happens when people are shot. and I think that they handled it very well. So anyway, so I'm blathering on about violence. 10 minutes are up. I'm done. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you think about targets. Comments are welcome.